the struggle over Palestine, which has been so intransigent, its elements so irreconcilable. I know that at a time when Palestinian land is still being taken, when our houses are demolished, when our daily existence is still subject to the humiliations and captivity imposed on us by Israel and its many supporters in Europe, and especially the US, I know that to speak of prior Jewish agonies will seem like a kind of irrelevance. I do not accept the notion that by taking our land, Zionism redeemed the history of the Jews, and I cannot ever be made to acquiesce in the need to dispossess the whole Palestinian people. But I can admit the notion that the distortions of the Holocaust created distortions in its victims, the Jews, which are replicated today in the victims of Zionism itself, that is, Palestinians. Understanding what happened to the Jews in Europe under the Nazis means understanding what is universal about a human experience under calamitous conditions. It means compassion, human sympathy, and utter recoil from the notion of killing people or oppressing them for ethnic, religious, or nationalist reasons. I attach no conditions to such comprehension and compassion. One feels them for their own sake, not for political advantage. Yet such an advance in consciousness by Arabs and Palestinians ought to be met by an equal willingness for compassion and comprehension on the part of Israelis and Israel supporters who have engaged in all sorts of denial and expressions of defensive non-responsibility when it comes to Israel's central role on our historical dispossession as a people. And this is disgraceful. And it's just unacceptable simply to say, as many Zionist liberals do, that we should forget about the past and go on to have two separate states. This is as insulting to Jewish memories of the Holocaust as it is to Palestinians who continue in their dispossession at Israel's hands. The simple fact is, and I guess this is really what I've been leading up to, is that Jewish and Palestinian experiences are historically, indeed organically connected. To break them asunder is to falsify what is authentic about each. We must think our histories together, however difficult that may be, in order for there to be a common future. And that future must include Arabs, all Arabs, and Jews together, free of any exclusionary, denial-based schemes for shutting out one side by the other, either theoretically or politically. That, I think, is the real challenge. And that is why I think Oslo, among other reasons, has failed. Because it didn't conceive of these two peoples as, in fact, they are. Connected through suffering, different experiences of suffering, and different experiences of history in Palestine. I think that's the real challenge. The rest, take my word for it, I think is a lot easier now. Thank you very much.
There's one seat right up here. And does anybody else have anything that's holding a coat or something that they can sacrifice? Okay, otherwise, welcome. This is the informal part of the evening right now. Welcome to our first Cambridge Forum program in our 31st season, which is very exciting. And I have a few announcements before our formal program starts. First of all, if you wish to receive information about our future programs, please be sure to add your name to the mailing list on the table. It's in the back of the room, which you'll all rush to after this program is over and you put your chairs away, because that's where all this stuff is. There's announcements about our future programs, and as I said, there is a mailing list that you can sign on so that you can get material in the future about our programs. In addition, and I didn't get the chance to put it there, but again, after the program is over, for interested individuals, there will be tapes of this available. We are audio taping this. That's something which we do all the time. I'll allude to that in a moment. Copies of those tapes are available for $11. It'll be a straight tape of this program, and you will be able to get those. If you're interested, you should actually, rather than even sign in, you should simply send a check for $11 payable to Cambridge Forum, and send it to Cambridge Forum, 3 Church Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 02138. Put a note on there saying Chomsky tape, and I will send you a copy. That's actually the best way to do it. So anybody who wants a tape of this program, or if you have friends who you think may want a tape, they are available. They're $11, Cambridge Forum. If you take one of our program schedules, you'll have the address, and you'll know what you need to do. As our friends are aware, this is important this evening, Cambridge Forum is a participatory activity, and the audience assists by folding the chairs at the end of the program and stacking them in the front of the room or on back. Actually, even in a number of them, are going to have to go back on the stands where we took them off. And you'll find out these chairs slide. It's a real drag, but it's a fun thing that we all do together. We are also a voluntarily funded organization, and we welcome donations in support of our public programs, which pay for things like the coffee and cookies that you'll also find in the back of the room. Some of you have found them already. I always do. And finally, our programs are recorded for future radio broadcasts. I mentioned about the taping. The aisle microphone is for audio taping. You'll need to project, but please step up to the microphone. We all get really excited and want to shout out our question, but please step up to the microphone because that's the way we record your question, and that's the way that it will be, that way it'll be preserved for the future radio broadcast if you're one of the lucky ones whose question gets included. So, welcome to Cambridge Forum. My name is Gail Leftwich, and I am director of the Forum. Cambridge Forum is now in its 31st year of providing live public forums for the discussion of vital policy issues with the goal of offering citizens useful information about the challenges facing contemporary society. The subject for discussion is the U.S. and the Middle East peace process. Our speaker, who is inaugurating a year-long Cambridge Forum series examining the challenging topic of the Middle East in this 50th anniversary year of the establishing of the State of Israel, is the ever-provocative and illuminating Noam Chomsky. Dr. Chomsky is Institute Professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he teaches in the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy. An extraordinary intellect, Professor Chomsky has written and lectured widely on linguistics, philosophy, contemporary history, and U.S. foreign affairs. The dilemma of relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians is a topic of long-standing interest for him, having recently published the 1996 edition of World Orders, Old and New, and spending part of this summer in Israel and the occupied territories to take part in events commemorating the 30th anniversary of the occupation. Welcome to Cambridge Forum, Noam Chomsky.
There was an interesting article in the Sunday New York Times by a respected commentator discussing U.S. foreign policy, and he explained that it had moved into what he called a noble phase, and in one respect had even acquired a saintly glow. That particular case was its administration of the Middle East peace process. Well, you know, it's not unusual for the powerful to be lauded for their wondrous qualities, but it rarely reaches the level of nobility and saintliness, although one can think of a few examples that it would be maybe impolite to mention. Anyway, putting the intriguing rhetoric to the side, the picture is more or less conventional, and it raises the question just why U.S. administration of the Middle East peace process calls forth such extraordinary accolades. It can't be just that the United States is advocating peace, because after all, everyone advocates peace, including Hitler and Attila the Hun and anyone you can think of. Peace on their terms, of course. So that can't be it. It can't be that the United States is implementing a peace process, though it is, because that happens all the time too, and we don't fall over in the claim for it. So, for example, 35 years ago, the apartheid regime in South Africa was instituting a peace process, establishing the first of the homelands, the Bantustan, and that was a genuine peace process, no doubt about it. The homelands were given, they were given autonomy. Blacks were going to be able to run their own affairs without interference. They had opportunities, even opportunities for wealth and privilege, those who cooperated with the white racist authorities in running the homelands. The more enlightened elements of the South African regime, the white regime, recognized that it would be necessary to maintain a certain degree of economic development, just to keep the things going. So they proposed and began to implement, in fact, policies of putting up industrial parks around the edges, which were places where white investors, but also the new black bourgeoisie who would arrive, would be able to exploit the super cheap labor that was kept under control in the territories. Another part of the program was that it was going to, as they put it, indigenize repression. That is, make sure that the new massive black police forces and security forces in the territory would be able to control the population directly with white force and reserve as needed. They could control the population without concern for the High Court and the human rights organizations, to quote Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin when he was explaining the Oslo agreements to the Israeli Knesset right after they were first announced, and therefore would be able to do a more efficient job without any bother. And there are other properties which ought to be familiar to those of you who pay attention to peace processes. Anyway, that was a genuine peace process, but it didn't call forth enormous praise. On the other hand, this one does, and then raises the question, why? What's the difference? What's the difference between the two? The question becomes particularly appropriate when you look more closely and you discover, as I think you do, in fact, that the South African Bantustan project is a virtual blueprint for what the United States and its dovish allies in the Labour Party are implementing and carrying out in the current peace process. To stress, I'm talking about the Israeli doves, Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, the Labor Meretz coalition. It's common to attribute all of this to Netanyahu and Likud and sort of bad guys. But if you look, I think you find that their differences are mostly style. In substance, it's rather different. I'll go on with this later. I'm just make a few comments now. That's the question. In order to answer it, we have to be clear about what the peace process is. So let's have a look at that. I only have a few minutes, so I'm only going to mention a few things, and that means that every one of you who's on your toes ought to feel that I'm omitting absolutely crucial factors, and you're right, I am, and maybe we can fill them out later. But the general outline seemed to be more or less like this. If you want to discover what the peace process is, there's two major sources of information. One is the official record, so the documents and so on. The other is what's going on the ground. Actually, they more or less coincide, so they're not in conflict, but those are the two sources of information, so let's look at them. The official record begins in 6 years ago in Madrid in 1991, when the Madrid conference opened, the current phase of what's called the peace process. That was unilaterally run by the United States. They brought in the Russians as a kind of a fig leaf, but everyone knew that didn't mean anything. It was a unilateral initiative by the United States to impose a certain kind of settlement that the United States wanted imposed. The fact that it was unilateral was important. It could be unilateral because the Gulf War had just taken place. The Gulf War established power relations very clearly. Europe, it was clear to everyone that this was U.S. turf. Nobody was going to allow it to interfere. Europe backed off. Soviet Union wasn't around. The Third World was in total disarray. The United States was then able to do something it had long wanted to do, but had been unable to do, and that is impose a unilateral settlement. Now, the fact that it was unilateral was very important because the United States had opposed all international conferences and initiatives for years, and the main reason was that the U.S. had been in almost total international isolation on Middle East diplomacy for about 20 years. And since this is a crucial area of U.S. domination and it has the power to keep anything from happening that it doesn't want to happen, it was able to block every diplomatic initiative. The 20-year process of blocking every diplomatic initiative is called the peace process here, but that's another topic. In any event, the fact that that happened is not in doubt. You can look at the UN record and the rest of the diplomatic record. After the Gulf War, the U.S. was able to disregard the world and just institute the peace process in its own terms, and that's what happened at Madrid. That was the Bush administration, and it had terms. The terms are not so easy to know because they were never published here, but they're on the official, they're published in official documents, but never made public. But they're there, and they're on the record. The Bush administration had an official policy. It was the Baker Plan, 5-point Baker Plan. The Baker was Secretary of State. The Baker Plan, its main component, was to establish a framework for negotiations. It said, here are the topics that are subject to negotiations. And those topics, it said, were the coalition plan of the Shamir Peres government. The Israeli government at that time had a coalition of the right wing and left wing, so-called Likud and Labor. And it had come out with an official plan. And the Baker Plan said, okay, that's it. Any negotiations have to be about the terms of how to implement the Peres-Shamir coalition plan. So there was a plan. It was the Baker-Peres-Shamir plan covering that spectrum. Turning to the Shamir-Peres plan, its first principle had two basic principles. The first principle was, I'll quote it, that there can be no additional Palestinian state between Israel and Jordan. The crucial word there is additional. The meaning is there already is a Palestinian state, namely Jordan. So the issue of Palestinian rights is gone. There is no further issue of Palestinian rights because that's been settled. There is a Palestinian state, it's Jordan, and there can't be a second Palestinian state. So what happens to the occupied territories? Well, that's the second point. The second point is that the status of the Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, the occupied territories, will be settled in accord with the basic guidelines of the government of Israel. That's the second point. And that's the U.S. plan. That's the official U.S. plan. As I say, it's kind of hard to find out because it was never reported in the press, but it is the official U.S. plan. You can discover it easily. I'll give you sources if you like. That's the plan that was instituted in Madrid. Well, what were the basic guidelines of the Israeli government? Now, here you got to look at a little bit of history. There are two major groupings, Labor and Likud. The Labor position was established back in 1968, called the Allon Plan. It's been modified a little bit over the years, but it's basically not changed all that much. The Likud program has taken various forms too. The most recent form was the Sharon Plan. Sharon's the kind of ultra-right Israeli general, minister, and so on. The Sharon Plan of 1992 and represents their approach. It's virtually identical to the Allon Plan. The differences are very small. What they both call for is Israeli control of the resources of the occupied territories and the usable land of the occupied territories, but not the population. They don't want to have responsibility for the population. They should either they should leave, which would be the best thing, or they should be under Jordanian administration or local administration or whatever, but not Israel's responsibility. Those are the basic guidelines of the Israeli government and of the U.S. government, and they are implemented because American taxpayers pay for them, and they don't know about it because they're not reported, but that's what they are. Well, that's the first stage of the peace process. The second stage is 2 years later, in September 1993, when the Declaration of Principles was announced with great fanfare in Washington, Oslo I. The Declaration of Principles didn't say very much, but it did say something. It stated that the permanent settlement, the long-term ultimate settlement, will be in terms of United Nations Resolution 242 and nothing else. Now, that's rather crucial. UN 242, which was agreed on in November 1967, UN 242 talks about peace among states. It says nothing about the Palestinians. Palestinians are mentioned only as refugees. They've got a refugee problem. But it calls for an agreement among states. Okay? And that's the permanent settlement. It's agreement among existing states, a peace treaty among existing states. Now, those of you who followed the issue know that there's something quite significant about that. From the mid-1970s, the international consensus on this matter changed to include the concept of Palestinian national rights as well. And there's a whole string of UN resolutions calling for Palestinian right, self-determination, and added to UN 242, and when you put those together, it becomes some kind of two-state settlement. The United States has voted against every such resolution, usually alone or alone with Israel, so the votes every year are like 150 to 2 or something like that.